now. Good afternoon, sir. How are you
Wonderful.
today?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you
It's
very much for having me.
yeah. It's been great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out.
No, of course, with pleasure. Wonderful, and I love the artwork behind you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm a
What
visual
is
artist,
that?
so it's one of my originals back there. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing!
I
Wow, I
appreciate it.
love it.
Well, and speaking of amazing, March 1st is going to be the big show. Live in Berlin's going to be rolled out. It's a wonderful album, so it's great to catch up with you. And there's so much that goes into this project, so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we get into the album and the show, I got to know, living through the pandemic 4.5 years ago or so was such a big deal for all of us, especially musicians. How much of living and going through that time period influenced either this project or what you've been doing now in 2025?
It's a great question. The last 4 years have been like insane. Both positively and negatively on all fronts. Of course, there's the pandemic, but what for me was also life changing. Not only the pandemic itself, but my son was born during the pandemic.
Okay.
So my wife and I became parents uh, like in 2021.
Yeah.
So, there's all what the pandemic brought to so many people, but also during the same time, my wife and I witnessed the birth of our son and, the kind of creativity that comes with that. Of course, we were lucky to have lots of times on our hands because we were both touring musicians.
Yeah.
So the fact that we had time to sit at home and reflect on things, I'm sure found its way into the music that we were creating at the time. The album was recorded during the pandemic. It was recorded at the Pierre Boulez Saal in Germany, in Berlin. It's an all in the round kind of theater, and everybody was masked, sparse audience, but it was one of these exciting moments that we were playing for a live audience. So I'm sure some of that also found its way into the how we played that night. Um, how did things affect me now looking back at it? I had more time to dig vertically, I think, into New York where I live. As a touring artist, you're always on the run.
Yeah.
And for me, being grounded in Brooklyn for the pandemic time allowed me to discover my neighbors. It allowed me to plant roots literally in the backyard where the backyard we have in Brooklyn. It was the first time that I got in touch. I always like to joke, get in touch with the soil and the soul of New York. It was surprising to discover that New York City has soil also,
Yeah.
and we planted trees during that time. But then fast forward to today, uh, lots of this music was inspired by the many concepts of home, whether it's Damascus where I'm from, but also New York where I live. And now seeing what happened recently in Syria, the fall of the dictator and the end of tyranny, and this hopefully will be a bright new world for us. So I'm sharing this music that was written during darker times, in times where I myself became more optimistic.
Yeah.
So, so the album is very timely in that sense, in
Yeah.
connection with both New York, Damascus, and the meaning of home at large.
Yeah. So let's go back to your beginnings and your roots. How did music become your destiny? And more specifically, how did jazz become your focal point?
I grew up in a household where, in Damascus, again, in Syria, to a household that is very culturally curious. There was so much music at home, lots of literature, global perspective on the world, if you want. My parents are not musicians, but they both picked up instruments. Again, I mean, they played as amateur kids. But when my sister and I was learning music instruments, my parents picked their instruments again to encourage us, to practice. So I grew up thinking that every family practices half an hour a day, and but jazz actually has not been the focal point of my life. I studied classical music, classical Western music. So I grew up playing Bach, Mozart, Brahms, and Beethoven. And that came from my dad's influence more. My mom listened a lot to Arabic music. But I think I improvised at a young age, and I was exposed to the likes of Benny Goodman, Sidney Bechet, Chet Baker, and all these people early on. And the clarinet, you know more than I do, is an incredibly versatile instrument. You can find that in so many different musical vocabularies. Jazz is one of them. But I don't consider myself to be, like, when I introduce myself, I don't say it like I am the jazz clarinetist Kinan Azmeh. I am a clarinetist and a composer who happens to have a wide spectrum of things I like. And these things that I like reflect themselves naturally in the music I compose and I play. So the band, and I think this album is reflects these interests. There are elements of jazz, elements of classical music, elements of Arabic music, but also elements from the other musicians who are on the album, who bring equally their vocabularies to the mix.
So, what was your first live jazz show you saw? Or what was the live moment where you thought, I would love to do this for my career?
That's a great question. I tell you what, there was a moment that was very meaningful. I think I was my dad throughout my life encouraged me to improvise. For some reason, he was obsessed with the idea, like, if you are doing anything creative, you have to go beyond of what's written down. And so he encouraged the idea of improvisation in life also. What do you do if you, like, for him, camping was a sort of improvisation where you improvise with nature. So I always wanted to improvise, but didn't know how to do it. So I would mess with the instrument, on my own. But one day I was 16 when I got the scholarship to study in New Hampshire for like a month, Western classical music, chamber music. And this horn player in the group, in one of the group, I was 16 at the time. She said, "Do you want to play this show for the public library?" It was somewhere in Keene, New Hampshire. And I said, "Sure. What do we play?" She said, "We'll figure this out once we get there." We arrive, and I said, "What do we do?" She said, "We're gonna improvise." And I freaked out. Like, what do you mean we improvise? She said, "Yeah, we'll just play something together." And I said, "Can you please simplify it for me?" And we were like walking into the library, and there are a bunch of kids waiting for us to play something. And she said, "I play a note, you respond by playing a note." And that moment was one of the most empowering musical moments of my life because that's exactly what we did. And that's why I knew that improvisation will have to have a huge part of my life. And it's an addictive thing. So since then, I think every concert I do, including ones where it's only Western classical music, I make sure that I'll improvise a little bit. And so the more general sense of improvisation took uh, took the forefront in everything I do from that moment on.
So was it always a dream to come to America? I mean, we obviously, New York is kind of a hotbed of jazz, but in general,
That's
was
right.
was that the dream of yours to get over to the States to continue furthering your studies and understanding?
uh, I did my undergrad both in music and engineering in Damascus.
Yeah.
And then when I wanted to go for like grad schools, they were players I wanted to study with. One of them was Charles Niedek. He's a big name when it comes to clarinet playing. And it was a dream of mine to come to Juilliard, the one of the at least most famous schools of music in the world. But America is famous for having a very kind of open educational system where you can do anything you like. So the reputation was there, and I knew I wanted to study in the US for my grad school, and that's where I came. And I went for 1 year in Boston, but then New York's gravitas brought me in, and now every time I walk in the city or I go and see shows in the city, I'm like, of course, I know why I am here, and I know why I'm still here 24 years after the day I moved to New York. That my plan was to come to New York to study for 2 years to do my master's and then go back to Damascus. But New York sucked me in like it does, I think, to many people, especially people who are in the jazz and the improvised music scene. This city is absolutely incredible.
Right now in America, we're going through a very strange time, and there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are making people question things. So my question to you is this. As somebody whose homeland finally got rid of something that had been wanting to get rid of for a while, what was that like to be in America, to watch that in your home country happening under the guise of everything that we're going through right now in the world?
Um, it's a wonderful, wonderful question because you know what Syria went through, or what the Ukrainians went through, or what the Palestinians went through, or what the Rwandans went through. Like, all of these are not tragedies that are specific to the nation where the tragedy happened.
Right.
It belongs to all of us, humanity. And I think we musicians, we have the ability to feel what other people feel, even if we're not part of that community. And I think so. Watching, what Syrians are going through, I'm watching it both as a Syrian who is involved, who knows a lot of what's going on there, but also I'm looking at it from a universal perspective too, trying to draw parallels. Every nation in the world is at some point at a risk of falling under dictatorship and tyranny. It's we've seen that in history. So if anything, I'm reminded not to take anything for granted. Like all the rights that people have, all the fundamental human rights. We have to all be super aware and super. We should never take this for granted because these can disappear. And also, I think musicians can no longer be in a bubble. Now, I think of this as a musician too. Many musicians tend to be only in the world, like music for the sake of music or art for the sake of art, which is fine. But I try to think, also musicians are simply citizens, and we belong to the world, and we have to advocate for any injustices that are happening anywhere else in the world too, because we are connected by default, because music is a universal language. I know it's a used and abused cliche, but it's something that I really believe in. So the work is always now. I think of the past, the future, but also the present. Of mu- Music making is an act of freedom, and it's a very democratic art form. So by doing that, by practicing that art, I'm hoping that we inspire everybody else to do the same.
Yeah, and jazz is such a warm, progressive, happy music to me. And it's interesting when I think about the clarinet. I remember I had an interview with Ken Peplowski years ago, and I will never forget this. I was asking him about the instrument for the layperson that doesn't understand how to play the clarinet. We've heard Benny, we've heard all of these innovators on the instrument, right? But what is it that we don't know about the instrument? And he said, you can make this whole song and you can play the clarinet beautifully through the whole thing, but if you hit one wrong note, it could wreck the whole thing. I will never forget that because it's so true. It's such a happy instrument to me. When the clarinet is interjected into a jazz tune, it just has a happy glow to it. But if it goes wah, wah, if it goes like sideways just for a minute, it's like everything's off course.
Actually, it's refreshing to hear you talk like that about the clarinet because I don't see it as a happy instrument.
Okay.
I see always the parallels between the clarinet, both in register and in dynamic range, to the human voice. And my favorite part of the clarinet sound is in the shallow register, in the lower register, which for me brings some echoes of like the duduk, the Armenian instrument, the ney, the Arabic ney. But also there's like a somber voice of somebody who smoked a lot over the years. For me, that's what it
Yeah,
brings.
yeah.
And I feel it as it's an introvert instrument at times and can be very extrovert also at other times. Depends on also on the register. My favorite part of the instrument is where it's more intimate, and it's more reflective. So in that sense, I see it. I hear it as well. I don't want to say sad or happy because I think music offers us things that are more complex than that. But I think interest in the instrument came from the fact that I felt it has a deep and buried sadness to it.
Yeah.
Maybe something that is more somber,
Yeah.
more than the flashy. in your face happiness.
Yeah.
But I guess what you said, I guess, proves a point that it's a very versatile instrument.
Yeah.
It can be extremely happy at times and in extremely mournful at other times.
Absolutely. No, that's such a, it's great that we see the polarities of it because it just shows the dynamic
Absolutely,
range of the instrument, you know. Um,
of course.
so what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What gets you up every day? What motivates you to constantly be at the top of your game?
Um, every time, I mean, I split my time between composing and performing. So some days I'm just getting up to finish like a new piece, right? And what motivates me to do so is the night before I left the piece in a place where I know it needs me to finish it. And this is such an exciting. It's a one person situation. I'm in total solitary work environment when I'm doing that, and it's just me and the piece of paper, the piano, my instrument. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, which is by far more exciting, I find, is when you go and you play. I get super excited. I love traveling. Traveling for me is an incredible luxury to have. You go, you not only see the venue, the backstage, the hotel, and maybe the bar next to the hotel and the airport, but I try to spend time with the communities that I'm playing for. It's very more interesting for me to see what people eat, what people drink, what people listen to, how people act and interact, nature. But also, you start a concert, you look out, and you see a bunch of strangers. At the end of the day, when you go on stage, it's like you're standing up in front of a bunch of strangers, sharing with them your most intimate secrets. And by the end of that concert, you are no longer a stranger. You are no longer strangers to each other, you know? And for me, that's what I love the most about my work as a performer. This ability to interact with people that otherwise I would never have the chance to interact with,
Yeah.
and to tell them my story, to hear from them their stories, and also to hear from them how they understood my stories.
Yeah.
There's something incredibly special about that. I mean, all of this without saying a single word, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a very meaningful way to interact as humans.
What a great, what a great story. What a great way to weave that together to kind of get an idea of all of us as people and the universal language of music. Um, why do you love this music that we call jazz?
Because it's a very, I think it's music that can be defined best as music that is deeply rooted in many traditions without being limited by any of these traditions. Jazz, and I'm using now jazz in the most, like in the widest sense of the word, has this ability to understand and to adjust and to accommodate and to welcome is the word I'm looking for, all other cultures
Yeah.
in such a dynamic way. And also, it's an art form where the it's a very democratic art form where the composer is as important as the performer. What's happening now, it's the art of now. When if you're playing jazz standard, who's playing is as important as who wrote the chart. Actually, maybe even more important than who wrote the chart. I cannot think of many art forms where that is the case. And also now, when you listen to like Latin jazz, Arab jazz, Balkan jazz, Greek jazz, it's able to bring in all these different cultures in a universal form where everybody feels welcome and everybody feels, you're able to contribute to that pool of incredible music making that is happening.
Yeah. So the new album Live in Berlin for the people of Syria will be presented on March 1st, Joe's Pub, New York City. If anyone wants to get involved, they're interested, any more details, or the best way to buy the album, what's the good business? Where can people go?
The good business, I mean, there's it's all online starting February 28th. If people wanna, stream, it will be all available in all, like, also, the standard selling points to buy the actual physical copy. We are printing CDs because I still like that. There's a
Oh yeah.
poster that comes with the album, which will be lovely, and the artwork is beautiful, done by a wonderful friend of mine. Um, My website, the label's website is a place where people can go. Dryer Guido is the name of the label that released the album. But also on the website, all the information as in where is the album going to be performed and also other performances, KinanAzmeh.com is the best way to go.
Okay, excellent. This has been wonderful. What a great revelatory look into the world and the music. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful show. Best of luck with the album.
Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you for this wonderful, inspiring artwork behind you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And